So let's talk a little bit more about the math, and then I want to also discuss some foreign policy too. So basically, though, what was interesting there, you said at one point during the interview that Nancy had, you're not sure if that's correct. What point do you think it was that Jeff Weaver was making?
So they're changing the math now. What he's saying is that she's not going to get to 2383 pledge delegates, but that's different than getting to a majority of the pledge delegates, right? 2383 is half of all the delegates, including superdelegates. Will she get to 2383? We don't know, but she's a lot closer right now if you include superdelegates, right? But to say that she's not going to get to 2383 pledged delegates, you're sort of erasing the fact that superdelegates exist. That's not what the metric is. The metric is total delegates.
No, that's not true. At the convention, that's when the pledged delegates. So if after June 17th,
he's saying, no, she's not going to get to 2,383 pledged delegates. That's not what the metric is. The metric is 2,383 delegates, pledged plus superdelegates.
To get to the convention, okay? Their superdelegates don't determine until they're on the convention floor. A lot of these states haven't even decided who their superdelegates were.
2,383
and
delegates.
none of them are declared yet because they can't do that until they're on the convention floor. Tad Devine, their person, designed this system. You think he doesn't know the rules?
I understand the point you're making. All I'm trying to say is you don't need 2,383 pledged delegates going into the convention. You need 2,383 delegates at the convention, right?
No, you need 2,383 pledged delegates at the convention, and then at the convention, okay, so at the convention, those superdelegates have to declare, and that's the number that's going to tip off. If she doesn't have that before the convention, because those superdelegates don't count right now, they're pledged superdelegates. They are not allowed to declare until they're on the convention floor. So up until the convention, we're just factoring in pledged delegates.
Right.
And she's not going to hit that number. That's what he's saying. Do you see what I'm saying?
But my point is to go over the top and get the nomination. It's a combination of 2,383 delegates, pledged plus superdelegates, correct?
Which will happen on the convention floor.
Saying she won't. He's not going to let her declare victory when she crosses 2,383 of pledged plus superdelegates, which is okay.
That's right.
You know, maybe he will get 100% of the superdelegates, and if she is less than 2,383 pledged delegates, then he'll be the nominee and they'll fight it out.
But historically, you become the presumed nominee when you cross the threshold of a majority of delegates, not just pledged delegates.
And that's how the press will take it, and that's how most voters will take it. But Bernie Sanders has got a nice excuse now to stay in through California, which is good. He gets to keep doing this, and he gets to move the issues and get his agenda through, and maybe win if something crazy happens.
Do we have Nancy with us still from Brooklyn? If so, I'd like her to weigh in. We're going to try and get her, I'm told. But it's an interesting point. One thing also that was interesting during the debate, and they touched on it there, Nancy and Jeff Weaver did, is the Israeli-Palestinian debate. Nancy, I want to actually turn to you for a moment and just ask you to weigh in. I know you couldn't hear what we were just talking about here, but the idea of 2,383, the number of delegates needed to secure the nomination. And Jeff Weaver had some interesting comments to you about sort of the metrics and how they're looking at it. Could you just kind of go over that for us?
Right. Well, they're looking at it in a way that is favorable to them. They know that Hillary Clinton is far more likely than Bernie Sanders to secure the number of delegates needed to clinch the nomination. And so they're now setting this new metric that she won't have enough pledged delegates. Well, as Steve pointed out, that is not the way that candidates secure the nomination. It is a combination of pledged delegates and superdelegates. And you may not like that system, but that is the way it is. And the bottom line is that since superdelegates were invented in the Democratic Party back in 1982, they have always basically gone in the same direction as the popular vote. So it's not as if pledged delegates would go one way and then superdelegates would go another way, and the will of the Democratic Party would be subverted. So that's the way that the system has been set up. The Sanders campaign is working very hard to try to change the minds of some of those superdelegates, because nearly all of the superdelegates who have announced their preference are with Clinton right now. And interestingly, I was told today that Bernie Sanders himself makes some of the phone calls to these superdelegates, that they have a team of people calling each of these superdelegates to kind of feel them out, see if they would be willing to switch their allegiance. And when a superdelegate says they might, then it goes up the chain, and often they get a phone call from Sanders himself. So this shows you how crucial these superdelegates are to the Sanders campaign, even as people like Weaver say that they don't count, and really it's the pledged delegate count that matters.
So it kind of relies on this what Weaver was saying kind of relies on this insane assumption. There's a possibility that you would get to the convention and Hillary would have won the majority of pledged delegates and gotten more votes, and yet Sanders will get all the superdelegates, which seems highly unlikely because A, superdelegates like to go with the establishment, so they're likely to go with Hillary, and B, they like to go with the top vote getter, so they're even more likely to go with Hillary. You can see the superdelegates kind of switching sides the other direction, but it's hard to see them switching away from Hillary if she has the majority.
What is the argument? What would the argument be to try and woo some of these superdelegates, Nomi?
Well, I think the argument has been that a lot of these superdelegates, or proposed superdelegates, because a lot of them haven't been chosen, pretty much half of them haven't been chosen yet, will have to reflect, and some of them are elected officials, so we know who they're going to be. They have to reflect the will of their voters. In some of these districts, like Wyoming is a perfect example, he won the majority. The argument that voters are making is, if Bernie Sanders won 80% of this district and you're still voting for Hillary Clinton as a superdelegate, that's irresponsible. And we're going to make that our, as voters, we're going to bring that up to you on election day, or we're going to bring that up to you. Now, put that all aside for a second. There are DNC rules, and these were set up in '81, and it was created as a coup, really, to a few reformer commissions that happened in the late '70s. So when this happened, this was purposely, along with stacking the early primaries at the beginning to be more conservative states, to protect a more conservative infrastructure, more conservative portion of the party in the '80s that saw the country more conservative. The problem here is, unlike any other elections, unlike Barack Obama, over half of the party is siding with, seriously, under 50, you have 80% of the party siding with Bernie Sanders. It is more of a problem for the Democratic Party if she doesn't reach that pledged delegate count by the time we go to the convention and we're relying on superdelegates. I have no doubt that there are going to be people around the DNC. There's going to be, I think that there's going to be a lot of conversation about why do we have a superdelegate system that protects more conservative candidates when our party's more liberal? Why do we have, this was all back to a commission. Maybe it's starting a new commission. Maybe it's getting rid of the superdelegate process at the convention. These are the kinds of conversations.
Well, I guess my question is to the Sanders folks and to you is why now? Why are we changing the goalposts? Why are we moving the goalposts this year? And we didn't.
It's big of a faction in the party.
But it's because he's losing though, or because it's a big problem all of a sudden?
Because this is the first time in history where that security net has actually worked. Previously, Democratic Party has allowed more candidates to come into the race.
You could make the argument it worked pretty well for Walter Mondale in '84.
That's not true, though, because the difference is this is the first time they took superdelegates and had them at the beginning. It used to be, with Walter Mondale's case, those superdelegates were supposed to declare at the end based on the rules. They started declaring at the beginning. And so when Hillary in August had over half of the superdelegates, she blocked out any other prospective Democratic candidates from coming in, leaving a Bernie Sanders to come in and fill that void.
Nancy, you want to weigh in?
Yeah, there is this notion that is starting to take hold among Bernie Sanders supporters that it is somehow superdelegates that are standing in the way of Bernie Sanders winning the nomination, and that if only you got rid of superdelegates, then he would have a much better shot. But he's also losing among pledged delegates by a pretty significant margin. So if you got rid of superdelegates tomorrow, he still would have a very, very difficult path to the nomination. And yes, he might not reach the threshold, but the threshold would be lower if there are more delegates, if there are fewer delegates being counted. I can tell you that the case that the Sanders campaign is making to these superdelegates when it tries to change their mind is not that he is going to catch up to Clinton in the pledged delegate count and overtake her anytime soon, but that he would be the stronger candidate in the fall. They think that this is something that, a notion that could sway some superdelegates. You look at polls like the CBS News poll that came out today that showed that he would beat Donald Trump by a larger margin than Hillary Clinton would. I think she was 10 points ahead, he was 17 points ahead. She would not beat John Kasich at this moment in a head-to-head matchup. Sanders would. And so they're arguing that sure, she might end up a little bit ahead or maybe a lot ahead of Bernie Sanders in the delegate count, but that he would be a stronger candidate in the fall, and that if Democrats are operating in their own self-interest, they will side with him.
I want to turn actually to some sound from the debate. It's SOT number 17, control room, if we have it. In fact, the candidates talking about Bernie Sanders was asked whether or not he plans to continue all the way to the convention, and he emphatically said yes. Do we have that soundbite ready? All right, let's go ahead and play that.
Do you vow to take this fight to Philadelphia no matter what?
I think we're going to win this nomination, to tell you the truth. Look, let me acknowledge what is absolutely true. Secretary Clinton cleaned our clock in the Deep South, no question about it. We got murdered there. That is the most conservative part of this great country. That's the fact. But you know what? We're out of the Deep South now, and we're moving up. We got here, we're going to California, we got a number of large states there.
I think it's important for people out there watching this tonight to know that I also have a considerable lead in pledged delegates. And my lead in pledged delegates is actually wider than Barack Obama's lead was over me.
Nancy, I'm just curious, you know, your interview with Brian Fallon a moment ago, when you asked whether or not how things would change if Sanders is staying in till the end here, he basically said it wouldn't. But in reality, how is her campaign being affected by Bernie Sanders' continued presence in this race?
Well, the way that they're being affected is that the longer this race goes on, the sharper his attacks on Hillary Clinton seem to get. Her attacks on Sanders have been pretty sharp all along. Let's posit that. But he started out pretty gentle. And as things have gotten more heated, as he's taken more incoming fire, he has started to train that fire on her. And so that makes things kind of uncomfortable for the Clinton campaign, especially as they try to turn their attention to the Republican nomination. It also, they worry, turns his supporters against Clinton permanently. Especially because a lot of his supporters are independents. They're people who weren't necessarily involved in the Democratic Party before. They're young voters. And so typically, you know, in any nominating process, at the end of the day, all the Democratic candidates who lost turn around and get behind the candidate who won. But in this case, if Sanders takes it all the way to the end, if he's saying things like Hillary Clinton isn't qualified, that she has bad judgment, after you've said things like that, it is very difficult to turn around and tell your supporters, never mind, I think you should back her anyway. Yes, there was bad blood between Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama in 2008, but you didn't have those kinds of blanket comments on each other's character. And even then, you know, it took a while for some Clinton supporters to come around to the notion that they were going to have to get behind Barack Obama.
All right. Nancy, thank you.